My company fired me, thinking they were cutting costs. 3 weeks later, I owned the firm that fired me, not by rage, not by force, but by becoming exactly what they feared, irreplaceable. We have made the decision to reorganize the client relations division. It's going to be your last day, Eleanor. Like an unpleasant smell, the words lingered in the air of the modern conference room. I glanced at Gavin Stone, the new managing partner who had joined Whitman's Stratagem Group barely 8 months earlier. He practiced his look, a deliberate fusion of detached professional with corporate remorse. Despite the earthquake occurring inside of me, my voice stayed constant after 22 years. He responded by slipping a manila folder across the gleaming table. Business decisions aren't personal, he said. HR has prepared a severance package, 2 months' salary and continuation of benefits through the end of the quarter. HR's Linda sat next to him, avoiding eye contact, but nodding compassionately. The necessary downside affects several departments, she stated. This isn't a reflection on your performance. But wasn't it? I was the oldest client relations employee, at 54. My pay was in line with my experience, which had contributed to the transformation of Whitman's Stratagem Group from a tenacious legal consulting business into a dominant force in the field. I inquired, does Charles know about this? In reference to the founding partner, Charles Whitman, who had personally employed me 22 years prior. Gavin's mouth clenched. All partners were consulted on restructuring decisions. A clear no answer. For the last 3 weeks, Charles has been in London, negotiating our entry into the European market. In closing, Gavin said, best of luck in your future endeavors, without ever opening his eyes to smile. Security will escort you to clear out your desk. Standard protocol. That protocol was written with my assistance 12 years ago. I'm Eleanor Blake, and I was the Senior Director of Client Relations at Whitman's Stratagem Group, one of the top legal consulting firms in Boston, until 10 minutes ago. Building relationships with our clients, learning about their needs, anticipating their worries, and making sure they felt appreciated beyond the billable hours was my career's focus. I had ensured that our clients viewed us as irreplaceable in a field where businesses were frequently viewed as interchangeable. Now, after a quarter-century of commitment, I was being thrown away like an old policy manual, leaving just a manila folder and platitudes. I carefully packed my personal belongings, including pictures of myself with clients at charity galas. Thank you notes from the Chambers family after we assisted them in navigating a complicated corporate restructuring. And the crystal paperweight Charles had given me on my 20th work anniversary, while the security guard hung clumsily by my desk. The CEO of Helix Care Systems, our biggest client, Vanessa Holt, texted me as my phone chimed. Eleanor heard troubling rumors about changes at WSG. Our quarterly review is next week. Call me. When I looked up, Gavin was already on the phone in his office, probably spinning damage control, watching. The fact that client relationships could not be moved in a letter or reassigned in a database was something he was unaware of, and that none of them appeared to comprehend. They were founded on personal connection, constancy, and trust, and I had recently been cut off from those relationships that had lasted for 22 years. When I started working for Whitman's Stratagem Group in 1998, we had exactly 17 clients, and occupied half a floor of a small office building. At 42 years old, Charles Whitman was full of enthusiasm and resolved to start a new sort of consulting business, where client happiness actually counted more than billable hours. Numbers are the language of business, Eleanor, he said to me when I interviewed him, but relationships are its heart. Anyone can crunch numbers, not everyone can build trust. I have lived up to that principle over the years. I concentrated on becoming indispensable to our clients, while others sought promotions through high-profile projects and office intrigues. I recalled the names of their kids and their college preferences. I was aware of which clients favored broad overviews and which required in-depth technical explanations. In order for us to anticipate their requirements, rather than just meet them, I kept track of company milestones, leadership changes, and strategic pivots. Charles had remarked, "You're the relationship architect," during my 18th anniversary party. "You've built the foundation that supports everything we do." Charles had led the company to steady growth. However, when we brought in outside investors to support our growth 2 years ago, things started to shift. Harvard MBAs and strategic visions that placed a greater emphasis on efficiency measures than client experience were brought to the executive team by new partners. The most aggressive of these acquisitions had been Gavin Stone, with his polished presentations and relentless attention to the bottom line. There had been a 38% rise in employee turnover since his arrival. Instead of Charles's client's first motto, the unofficial one now reads maximum value extraction. Our client retention numbers were starting to decline, something I had brought up in executive meetings. "We're sacrificing long-term stability for short-term gains," I said. "The market is changing, Eleanor," was Gavin's contemptuous reply. "We need to adapt or die. Some of our legacy processes are frankly outdated." Over the previous 6 months, I had become more excluded from strategic talks. Invitations to meetings ceased to come in. My address was missing from email threads. Without consulting me, younger team members were designated as supplementary contacts for important client accounts. Still, I'd hoped my institutional expertise and client contacts would safeguard me. After all, I oversaw customer relationships that accounted for more than 57% of our yearly income. Vanessa Holt alone earned about $3.5 million a year, and she had made it clear in her most recent contract extension that she wanted me to be her main point of contact. However, I had recently felt a more sinister development. I had heard Gavin on the phone last week. "The restructuring gives us an opportunity to trim the legacy fat. Their retirement plans would cost us millions in the long run." I ought to have anticipated it. However, I had erred in believing that loyalty still mattered after 22 years. Being hauled out of the premises like a security danger was still a source of embarrassment. 3 days later, I was sitting in my apartment with unanswered texts from coworkers and job-hunting websites all around me. There was nothing like an abrupt termination to make you momentarily intriguing, as my LinkedIn profile had erupted with views. My landline, which I don't often get these days, rang. Before I recognized the number, I was on the verge of leaving it on voicemail. "Hello? Eleanor, it's Charles." The tightness in his well-known British accent was unusual. "I just landed from London and heard the news. This wasn't authorized by me." I was overcome by a complex range of feelings, including satisfaction that Charles had not authorized my dismissal, rage that it had occurred nonetheless, and a persistent feeling of betrayal that he had failed to shield me in spite of our past. "Well, it happened regardless," I said in a bland tone. Gavin said all partners were consulted. Charles, clearly frustrated, added, "I was purposefully sidelined. They waited until I was overseas, dealing with the EU regulatory issues. The executive committee pushed it through on an emergency approval basis, citing immediate necessity to improve quarterly projections before our investor meeting." 22 years, Charles. I deserve better than a 10-minute meeting and a security escort." He concurred, saying, "You deserve much better. I want to make this right. What if I bring you back? We can call it a misunderstanding, a communication error." I cut in, "It's not that simple. Gavin made it crystal clear that I'm considered dispensable." Legacy fat was the term I heard him use. I could tell Charles grasped the importance of what I was saying by the quiet on the other end. Being undercut by leadership was a death sentence for performance in the business world. Really, there was no turning back after that. "I'm sorry, Eleanor. Truly, this company was built on the relationships you nurtured. And how are those relationships being maintained now that I'm gone?" I responded, "One more pause. Gavin assigned your accounts to the junior partners. Tara Colby is handling Helix Care Systems." I couldn't help but laugh dryly. Tara's pushy and impersonal manner had caused Vanessa Holt to publicly dispute with her during a strategy session last year. Good luck with that. I hung up and looked at my phone as the notifications started to appear. Customers were contacting Vanessa, as well as Neil from Vanguard Biopharma, Claire from Pinnacle Capital Group, and the whole Stonecrest Industrial Management team. Word was getting out that I was leaving. None of them had been contacted by me. Regardless of how my prior company treated me, I was too professional to disparage them. However, clients converse with one another. They attend the same conferences, serve on the same boards, and are members of the same trade associations. My doorbell rang. I was given a hefty envelope by a courier. It contained a handwritten note and an official letter from Samantha Rhodes, the most sought-after headhunter in Boston's consulting sector. Heard what happened at WSG? Several firms would value your client portfolio. Dinner tomorrow? As I put the letter down, I remembered Gavin's arrogant expression when he fired me. I had no intention of undermining Whitman Stratagem Group. I didn't have to. That's what they'd already done. At 7:38, the following morning, my phone rang. Vanessa Holt had no desire to waste time on small talk. Without introducing herself, she demanded, "Tell me you're not actually gone." I said, "I'm afraid I am," as I poured my coffee. Restructuring, they called it. Catherine yelled, "I've worked exclusively with you for 12 years. Tara Colby emailed me yesterday, introducing herself as my new relationship manager. That girl tried to explain my own business model to me last year." I was careful with my word choice. Whitman Stratagem Group is making strategic changes. I'm sure they believe they're acting in the best interest of their clients. Don't give me the corporate line, Eleanor. We've known each other too long. Catherine hesitated. Where are you going next? I haven't decided yet. We'll decide quickly. Our contract with WSG is up for renewal in 60 days. I'd prefer to follow you. At this point, I ought to have reassured them that Whitman Stratagem Group work would continue to be of a high caliber, even if their staff changed. Professionalism demanded that. Rather, I said, "I appreciate your confidence, Catherine. Let me explore my options and get back to you by noon." 5 additional significant clients had called me in a similar manner. That number had increased to 11 by dinner time. None had been solicited by me. I hadn't had to. With her keen eyes evaluating me through reading glasses, Samantha Rhodes greeted me at a fancy restaurant in Back Bay. Her words, "You're the talk of the industry right now," came after she gave the order. Gavin Stone made a catastrophic mistake. "Perhaps," I murmured without committing. She chuckled. "Always diplomatic. That's part of your appeal." Across the table, she slipped a folder. "3 firms want to meet with you. 2 are creating a special position specifically to bring you and your client relationships on board." I almost choked on my water as I looked at the compensation amounts. They were offering me about twice as much as I had previously made. As Samantha read my face, she clarified, "They're not just paying for your expertise. They're paying for your little black book." I didn't miss the irony. Whitman Stratagem Group had thrown me out because I was too costly, but now their rivals valued me twice as highly. I questioned whether Gavin had taken this into account when figuring out how to decrease costs. Charles called again the following morning. "I need to see you," he remarked in an unusually angry tone. "Can you come to the office?" "I don't think that's appropriate, given the circumstances." Then lunch. The harvest. 1. "Please, Eleanor. Things are happening that you should know about." My curiosity overcame me. When I entered the harvest at exactly 1 p.m., Charles was already seated and very gaunt. He said, "Thank you for coming," with a tone of relief. "I've been trying to fix this situation, but Gavin is blocking me at every turn. He's convinced the board that your termination was necessary for modernizing our approach." I inquired, "And the clients? How are they responding to this modernization?" Charles flinched. "Not well. Vanessa Holt has demanded a meeting with the entire executive team. Neil from Archer is reviewing their options. 3 smaller clients have already given notice." I gulped my drink without uttering a word. "Here's what I'm proposing. Charles said, bowing his head. I create a new position, Chief Client Officer, reporting directly to me, bypassing Gavin entirely. Better compensation, more autonomy. It was exactly what I would have wanted a week ago, and it sounded great. Too ideal. I noticed something beyond concern in Charles's expression. Fear. What aren't you telling me, Charles? He paused. Gavin has a plan to push me into early retirement. He's been consolidating power, building alliances with the newer partners. If the client's situation deteriorates further, he'll use it as leverage to force me out. That was it. Charles had no intention of saving me. His goal was to save himself. I was just a tool to do that. I'm sorry, Charles, but I already have meetings scheduled with other firms. You understand, business decisions aren't personal. The expression on his face when I retorted Gavin's statements nearly made the entire experience worthwhile. Nearly. I visited with each of the 3 businesses Samantha had suggested over the course of the following week. Every meeting had the same format: lavish compliments on my ability to build relationships with clients, vague inquiries about which clients could follow me, and progressively larger compensation promises. A mid-sized company with principles similar to those of the original Whitman Stratagem Group, Noblebridge Consulting, was the one I was leaning toward. Despite my contributions to the expansion of the company, I had never been given an ownership partnership at WSG, but that was part of their offer. In the meantime, things at Whitman's Stratagem Group were going worse more quickly than I had even predicted. Client dissatisfaction and leadership conflicts were being reported on industry blogs. Ethan, my former assistant, sent me updates via SMS. In fact, Vanessa Holt had met with the executive team and was clearly upset when she left. Archer Pharmaceuticals, Neil, had called off their quarterly review. It was rumored that even Stonecrest Industrial, a client renowned for their institutional devotion, was looking for proposals from rival companies. Then came the call that made all the difference. Eleanor Blake? As I read Noblebridge's offer letter, I responded, Miss Blake, this is Jeffrey Hammond from the Boston Business Journal. I straightened my posture. The BBJ served as the corporate world of Boston's Bible. I'm working on a story about the recent leadership changes at Whitman Stratagem Group and their impact on client relationships. Several sources have mentioned your name. Would you be willing to comment? This was hazardous territory. I might be subject to legal action under the non-disparagement clause in my severance agreement if anything I stated was seen as insulting my previous company. I'm not comfortable commenting on internal matters at Whitman Stratagem Group, I said thoughtfully in response. Understandable, according to Hammond. What about the fact that 7 major clients have already announced they're terminating their relationships with WSG? Industry insiders are suggesting this exodus is directly related to your departure. 7 customers. None of the 15 people I'd interacted with directly had made it clear they were quitting WSG. I can't speak to clients' business decisions, I replied. Many factors go into selecting consulting partners. Of course, Hammond's typing was audible. One more question. Any comment on the letter signed by 26 of WSG's clients demanding Charles Whitman replace Gavin Stone as managing partner? I almost dropped the phone. I have no knowledge of such a letter. I hung up and sat there in stunned quiet. 26 customers, a concerted effort to replace Gavin. None of this was planned by me. Ethan texted me and my phone buzzed. Emergency all-hands meeting called for tomorrow morning. Partners are flying in from everywhere. Gavin looks like he's about to have a stroke. Charles called an hour later. Without introducing himself, he demanded, Did you organize this client revolt? I've done nothing, Charles. I haven't solicited a single client. He sounded distressed as he asked, Then how do you explain this? 65% of our client base is threatening to leave. The board is in panic mode. Investors are demanding answers I don't have. Perhaps they value relationship continuity more than cost-cutting efficiency, I said. This isn't a joke, Eleanor. 22 years of building this firm and it could collapse in 25 days. Hearing the fear in Charles's voice, the same Charles who had failed to keep me safe after 22 years of devotion, brought a sad sense of satisfaction. "What do you want from me, Charles?" "Come back," he begged. "Not as chief client officer, as a full equity partner. Help me stabilize the situation." "Mate, for at least 10 years, I had been denied the position I earned. And Gavin," Charles's tone became stern, "the board is meeting tonight. His future will be decided before tomorrow's all-hands meeting." In front of me, I considered the Noble Bridge offer. There, a partnership would be cozy, profitable, and far simpler than going back to WSG. However, I had spent 22 years cultivating those client ties. They were my life's work in many respects. When I eventually said, "I need to think about it," "I'll give you my answer in the morning." Sleep avoided me that night. The digital clock was ticking away to morning as I paced my flat, considering my alternatives. Going back to the Whitman Stratagem Group would mean confronting the coworkers who had silently seen my embarrassing departure. It would include negotiating the political fallout from Gavin's seeming demise, which I hadn't planned but would undoubtedly be held accountable for. For years, the culture of the company had been declining. That wouldn't be resolved by a single change of leadership. However, Noblebridge provided a new beginning. New coworkers, a new culture, fresh possibilities. The partnership and salary were significant. I could create something dynamic and bring along willing clients. I had made up my mind by 6 in the morning. Knowing that Samantha Rhodes would be awake, I called her. I informed her, "I'm going with Noblebridge." "Wise decision," she said. "I'll let them know. They'll be thrilled." I said, "There's something else I need from them," as I described my situation. After listening, Samantha burst out laughing. "Eleanorless Eleanor. I love it. I'll present it to them this morning." I entered Whitman Stratagem Group for the first time since I was fired at 8:45 a.m. The eyes of the receptionist grew wide. "Miss Blake, are you here for the all-hands meeting?" "I am. Charles is expecting me." When I got there, the meeting room was full. Normally, virtually present partners had traveled in from all across the nation. The walls were filled with junior employees. With board members on either side of him, Charles took the lead. Gavin was noticeably missing. As I stepped into the room, silence descended. From the other side of the room, Charles could see his relief. He started by saying, "Thank you all for coming. As you know, we're facing unprecedented client concerns following recent staffing decisions." His gaze strayed to mine. "I'm pleased to announce that Eleanor Blake has agreed to return to Whitman Stratagem Group as a full equity partner, leading our newly formed client relations division." There were murmurs among the crowd. For silence, Charles held up his hand. "Additionally, the board has unanimously voted to remove Gavin Stone as managing partner, effective immediately." His approach was ultimately deemed inconsistent with our firm's values and client commitment. A mixture of astonishment, relief, and uncertainty was practically palpable in the room's electrifying atmosphere. "Eleanor, would you like to say a few words?" Charles gestured me onward. Ethan gave me a subtly encouraging look from the back wall as I positioned myself at the front of the room. I looked at the faces in front of me. They were all alert, some eager, some cautious. "Thank you, Charles. I appreciate the offer to return as partner," I said. "However, I must clarify something important. I'm not coming back to Whitman Stratagem Group." Charles's expression froze in bewilderment. A number of board members looked at each other in horror. "Instead," I said quietly, "I'm pleased to announce that I've accepted a partnership position at Noblebridge Consulting, which has just completed acquisition negotiations with Horizon Capital to purchase a controlling interest in Whitman Stratagem Group." Shocked cries reverberated around the room. Charles appeared to have been hit. I went on, "The transition will begin next week," once the commotion had stopped. "Noblebridge has assured me they value the institutional knowledge and client relationships built here. There are no plans for mass layoffs or restructuring, unless, of course, they're deemed necessary for efficiency." Charles stepped forward. Eleanor, what have you done? I haven't done anything, Charles. Noblebridge has been seeking to expand their Boston presence for years. Horizon Capital, as majority shareholder in WSG, was happy to consider their offer, especially given recent client instability. It's just business after all. Nothing personal. I could see Charles's eyes light up as the ramifications became clear. When it came to protecting me, he had fallen short. He had permitted short-term advantages to come at the expense of loyalty. He realized the real cost of his choices now that he was confronting his own obsolescence. The gathering dissolved into mayhem as I strode out, head high. My phone rang with a text from Vanessa Holt. Just heard the news. Dinner tonight to discuss Helix Care Systems' future with Noblebridge Whitman. As I entered the elevator, I grinned. Justice had reached me, even if I hadn't sought retribution. The following morning, the story was reported by the Boston Business Journal. Consulting shakeup. Noblebridge acquires Whitman Stratagem Group after client exodus. The report explained how an extraordinary client revolt had been sparked by the departure of a key top executive, which caused the firm to become unstable enough to allow for the acquisition. Only once in the 16th paragraph did my name appear. Eleanor Blake, former Senior Director of Client Relations, has accepted a partnership at Noblebridge and will oversee the integration of Whitman Stratagem Group's client portfolios. What was actually a seismic power change was described clinically. I went from being fired to being in charge of the future of the company that had fired me in just 3 weeks. Planning for integration got underway right away. I reviewed organizational charts and client portfolios from both firms while working from Noblebridge's offices. Every day, a stream of former Whitman coworkers knocked on my door, some wanting to confirm their roles, others recalling abruptly how they had always valued my work or disapproved of Gavin's choice. A week following the announcement of the transaction, Charles asked to meet. In 20 days, he had aged 10 years. He sat across from me and stated, "You orchestrated this," which was an allegation more than a question. "No, Charles, I simply recognized my own value, even when you didn't." I interrupted, saying, "Gavin was a symptom, not the cause. You allowed the firm's culture to change. You prioritized growth over relationships. You forgot the principles you founded the company on." His words were scathing. "And now you control it all," he continued. "Not control, Charles, influence. There's a difference, one you used to understand." I moved a piece of paper across the desk. "Noblebridge is offering you a 3-year consulting position. Only. No management responsibilities. It's generous, considering the circumstances." He gazed at the document, at me, and if I refuse, then you walk away with nothing but your ownership payout. Your choice. 2 floors of a shiny downtown tower were occupied by Noblebridge Whitman Consulting 6 months after the acquisition. Due in part to my insistence on keeping the majority of Whitman's employees, who I knew were valuable even when others didn't, the integration had gone more smoothly than anyone had expected. After causing a spectacular collapse, Gavin's reputation was damaged, and he ended up in a smaller firm. Although we continued to communicate in a purely professional manner, Charles had agreed to the consulting job. His failure to protect me after 22 years would leave a wound of betrayal that would never completely heal. I looked over the quarterly figures in my corner office with a sense of satisfaction I'd never let myself display in public. Over 95% of clients were retained during the transition. The 3 customers who had departed during the original evacuation were already back. Our total sales increased by 23% from the previous year. My helper knocked and came in. "Miss Holt is here for your lunch." Wearing a well-tailored suit, Catherine walked in with her usual elegance. "Congratulations on the quarterly results." The industry is still talking about the most elegant corporate takeover they've seen in decades. I grinned. It wasn't a takeover. It was a market correction. Catherine said, "Call it what you want," with a laugh. "You proved what I've always known. In professional services, the relationships are the real asset. Everything else is just infrastructure. As we made our way to lunch, I thought back on the previous 6 months. When I was fired by Whitman Stratagem Group, I hadn't sought retribution. I hadn't had to. The company had overlooked the fact that their methods, tactics, and even brand did not truly represent their true worth. Clients felt prioritized, appreciated, and understood because of the human relationships. They had set themselves up for failure by cutting me off without knowing what I stood for. And in doing so, they had unintentionally put me in a position that I had worked hard for 22 years to obtain. Sometimes the quietest revenge is just living your truth and living it well. I didn't scream. I didn't fight. I grew. If you've been hurt or betrayed, I hope you remember, you don't need to get even. You just need to get free. Set boundaries. Heal. Let your success speak louder than your anger. And if you're still in the middle of it, know that peace is possible. I'd love to hear your story. Have you ever turned betrayal into something better? Drop it in the comments and let's talk. You're not alone.